Awesome. That was amazing.
Thank you, Ryan.
Well, that's exciting that people are interested in theory. I was blown away when I started listening to the podcasts. I'm not kidding about the paper. It was about 5 or 6 clinical journals that did not even send to reviewers because we're not interested.
It's crazy.
It's really interesting, that point. I wanted to say right at the end about how do we communicate that with patients. And I was thinking, one of the things that we try to do in practice is introduce a different idea, which brings together all the points that we were made, is that there's a tendency, particularly in people with pain, tend to move and tend to think and tend to operate in the same way. They don't allow themselves the affordances of different opportunities in any of those domains. And one of the things that has helped in my practice, and I don't know if it would work in yours, is to ask somebody, just fold your hands. Just, you guys just do it now. Fold your hands. So
Like
fold
this?
your arms. Oh, sorry, fold your arms. Fold your
Okay.
arms. All right, fold your arms. Now think how easy, or just think how that feels. And now fold them the other way. Yeah. All right. How does that feel? So we're doing the same thing. We're just doing it slightly differently. But you can tell that it's difficult. It's hard.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm going to ask us to do together, is I'm going to ask you to do something that's challenging. It's difficult, but we'll achieve the same aim. Yeah. So so what I really love about what you've kind of bringing together here, I'm blown away by. I really, really enjoyed it. And also I could have gone into the kind of inactive versus ecological philosophy. I could have, I was really interested in that stuff. But what really brought that, the whole thing together for me was looking at clinical practice as this rich opportunity for affordances. And often what we try to do, because we want to help people, is think of ways to moderate the pain and mediate the pain, or take things away. So there was a paper I did on dispositionalism, the causal nonlinear interactions between causal powers. And the tendency of clinicians is to try to take things away to reduce pain. And actually what you're doing is you're thinking about the environmental context and saying, well, how can we enrich this, which actually has a counterproductive effect. It had counteractive effect on perhaps pain. So yeah, I've got to think about this and probably start buzzing in my head for the next couple of weeks. So it's really nice.
The inactivism ecological distinction. I think, I work with Tony Chimero. He's my colleague and he's been trying to bridge the gap between these two lines of reasoning. But, I think at the moment, it's not that there aren't distinctions, but I don't think I could not think of one distinction that would affect and create different recommendations right now. It doesn't mean that they don't exist. But right now, I don't think the debate is helpful for clinicians, because then it becomes so philosophical that but I think the philosophical is really important. That's what I do for life. That's my passion, to understand these things for the sake of understanding. But because of my PT background, I want to see, okay, if I think differently about this, what kind of new solutions emerge?
Yeah, I really like the idea of theory building as opposed to theory, breaking. And there's often lots of very plausible theories that may not fit your paradigm, but then there's probably something in it. It doesn't explain everything, but actually often good therapists are the ones who can take the best of lots of things. And I would say that about researchers, I'd say that about scientists, I'd say that in any kind of profession, of those who have the ability to co-construct lots of very plausible theories and apply them to the right situation in the right person, the right context.
And to me, the only care we should take, it's because the reductionist Cartesian thinking is so, the pull to our thinking that way is so strong.
It is.
That I think mixing and matching theories that conflict at a basic level is problematic, because that will not allow us to really make the shift to accepting and embracing complexity. And I think ecopsych or inactivism both embrace that. So I think we're safe combining things from these two. I think we have to be really careful about combining things from theories that come from the assumption
Yeah.
of the type of causal mechanisms that
Linear.
are getting us in trouble over and over again.
Yeah.
And
Linear.
right, the linear causation issue. Because if our patients will think like that, we're going to be attracted to think like that. Even we that believe that that's not the case, that the other theory makes more sense.
Yeah.
I find myself all of a sudden like, oh, why am I finding that weird? I should step back. There's
And I
weird.
think one of the issues is for
complex systems.
explanation. Often we come to Cartesian dualism because it's easier. It's just easier.
It's easier. It's much
And
easier.
even when you were speaking, Paula, earlier, you were talking about the body and the mind. And
I know.
you think that way.
See how
But
tragic.
for explanation, yeah, there's a kind of fact of the matter. It's just easier to do.
Yes.
And that's why it's very, very difficult. We have to kind of say things like, well, humans, or,
Yes. Yes.
the body, my
Yes.
body, my
I
brain.
am to blame. That's why I was pointing to myself. We are putting myself in, despite the fact that I defend the non-dualistic view of these things.
Yeah.
I fall trap all the time. I fall in the trap all of the time. That's why I really fight explanations
We all
that
do.
are not at this fundamental level agreeing. So the mixing and matching of theories can put us in that trap.
Generated from a foundational context.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
I wonder if Ike is still here. Ike, did you want to ask your question?
Oh, sure. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I thought I just stayed. The conversation was interesting, so like I was gonna, not necessary to ask questions, but
you had a question. Let me introduce you. So Ike is with the Chicago Cubs organization, has been attending the webinars, and you had a really good question, but you can ask whatever.
So I just thought I was just wondering from the movement variability perspective, like to replicate, just the situation you said, like the wild that the players or the patients that they are exposed in is either external or internal environment or important the other. Like the only example I could think of is like the free throw basketball example, like the experiment. Like they test the success rate of the free throw. One group is just practice 100 throws at the free throw line, and the other group is like from the baseline to 45 degrees to like 3 points, and total number of the practice are like hundreds, but that's like external. But internal would be like maybe I could put them in at the different heart rate or like the different, I don't know, like so that's kind of like, yeah. Do you have any thoughts on it?
So I'm trying to again understand the question. So you're saying that they compared 100 free throws with what?
So the experiment I looked at was like putting people into two groups. One group was the practice 100 throws only from the free throw line.
Okay.
And the other group practice 100 throws, but 10 from the right wing, 10 from the left wing, like 10 from the 45 degrees, like that only 10 throws from the free throw line, but 100 total from different angles from the field. And obviously, the latter, the variability option, at the more success rate on the test from the free throw line. So that's more that's an example of like external environment, like the variability. But and obviously they didn't test anything like changing the internal environment, just like heart rate or anything, changing the heart, heart rate kind of stuff. But from your perspective, from what you study or whatever, I was wondering if there's any, I guess, ranks or the more important than the other, external versus the internal.
Can I just throw something out first, Paula?
Yep.
So this paper that Ike's referring to is a very famous paper, and what they showed was that when you do the blocked practice of just practicing from the free throw line, the skill is acquired much faster, but there's an erosion. It doesn't last. It's not resilient. And so retention and longer term performance gains came from the more random practice.
Yeah. And
So
there is
fool's gold. And I think that has come up before. Somebody asked a question. They're not with us right now. But you're still here, right, Aaron? Aaron?
Yep, I'm here.
Yeah, so there was a question. Geronimo, you're here too, right? Geronimo?
I think we lost G.
So Ryan, you're here?
Yes.
So there was a wonderful question, Paula and Matt, at the very beginning of the dialogue, which really I wish we had tackled, because it relates to the three issues I brought up in the very beginning, the third of which is about the clinicians themselves. And it's your point, Paula, about this idea of wanting to make it all simple and Cartesian and unidirectional, when in reality it's chaos. And this question was from Mara Fratazio. I don't think Mara is still here, is she, Aaron? Or he?
Let me check.
I don't see, but let me read the question to you, Matt and Paula, because I'll let you answer it, and then I think we'll probably end this. But Mara said, you approach it by recognizing the patient could benefit from an effective treatment that will affect their situation immediately. The worst demotivation is training a person and having them suffer or underperform when a few effective treatments could have changed that training from a negative to a positive. In our practice, that is usually dry needling and any other appropriate form of manual therapy, combined with self-care and appropriate functional training. My practice is overwhelmed by patients who have had months and years of seemingly appropriate training with good effort and guidance by physios and trainers to no avail, and just a few treatments affect load tolerance and muscle activation. I understand your dire situation of over ineffective treatment, but don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. The methods of active care are practiced globally here in Norway, and yes, it is effective and the way to go, but effective treatment can't and should not be fully replaced. So this is that third point, the unidirectional kind of Cartesian model, where somebody is thinking that because we're talking about the limitations of some of the older approaches, and we're talking about training in a more variable way with less guidance about correct versus incorrect, that we're throwing the baby out with the bathwater. So I don't know how you feel about that. I'll throw it to you first, Matt.
I think it kind of appeals to this idea of a reward mechanism. So we know that, or we believe that when learning should be associated with some sense of reward, you know, but the immediacy of the award of using passive interventions relies on other people rather than on ourselves. So at best, it can only be a short-term strategy. So I think really,
I think you said it. I think that's the answer. It's a short-term strategy, because unless the person learns that they're not fragile, then how will they handle stress in the future? So we never would say that we should stop doing manual therapy. That's not what we say. Nor did I hear you say, Paula, that there are not technical proficiencies that aren't important. We just feel that since all experts move in variable ways, that we should use more randomness. Did I hear that right, Paula?
Yeah, because complex systems is not saying that components don't exist. It's just saying that they interact in ways that create behavior that cannot be explained by the simple sum of these component functions. That's all we're saying. But once this behavior emerges, it's going to fix the component's behavior. So there is this impredicative logic instead of the Cartesian one-way direction from components to whole. But we're saying that full function can be used to modify components too, right? So you can use full function to recruit components and modify the components to promote a different version of that function too, right? So we're not saying some magic here, let's just do up here and forget about what we can do to promote that organization of components. And sure, if you can do a couple of sessions of passive therapy and the patient feels okay about, feels better about the pain, and that is a gateway into getting them active, just as long as we don't stop there and we continue to work on the fact that your pain did not stop because now you're dependent on this every time there's pain, that's what you need. You know, you still need to work on the self-efficacy and the activation piece, because that's the danger, right? So if you do some passive thing and the pain improves, there is that very strong link with a very salient effect, my pain reduced. And the only salient cause that they're gonna be looking at is your hand doing the manual therapy. And then disconnecting this is going to be not easy. Right? Because you're reinforcing
your overly protective counsel. Like, you should lift this way.
Same thing.
Yeah.
Because now if you say you're going to lift this way, now you're creating you're setting up the system to produce that behavior, that particular movement. And I'm not saying this out of my head. There is research showing that when you tell people produce this aiming movement, and you try to aim something at a target, but you say, here is the movement of the arm that I want you to do, over and over again, people tend to show less variability in movement trajectories. If you tell them, just get the dart on the target, they're going to show more variability. So just the change in instruction changes what the system is trying to accomplish. If the system is trying to accomplish a repetition of a movement, it's going to get there, but is that what you want? You're going to, like to the question about the shooting, you're going to get very high performance on that one thing. You're optimized for that one point that you're throwing, but you're not optimized for basketball.
Nor are you optimized for making the free
not,
throw. Nor are you optimized for making the free throw at the end of the game.
No, right?
Because it's a totally different, your legs feel totally different. Your breathing is different.
I mean, that finding that he's describing is available in so many different tasks, right? Since Schmidt's theory of learning, people have been doing this over and over again. The variability is important, right? The way he explains it is not in the dynamical, ecological, inactivist way, but it already was pointing to the importance of variability to generate this generalized rule for movement that's more robust. So he was going after that, and he got tons of support from the benefits of variability of practice, which is not short-term performance. It's typically retention and transfer.
Yeah. Ryan, what are your thoughts for Mara? Because this will take us out. This will be the final part of the recording.
Oh man.
Because I feel like Mara's question is the question of the master.
It is important, yes.
I think that is the question not to shove under the rug. I think that's why Lorimer took Lancet to task. He said, yeah, this is very smart, intelligent, it's well researched, but it's missing some key things, like it's making it seem like it's so easy to change people's behavior. And we're talking about not only the patient, but also the practitioner, because we've disseminated the evidence, but it's not being implemented. Like Luke Davies and Paul McCambridge talk about that a lot too.
I think it just goes back to what we were talking about in the beginning about getting to know the person in front of you. We gotta be able to, I think, ask them about what they think was helpful, what they think wasn't helpful in their past, and why they thought it was or wasn't, and we can decide for that person in front of us, is that necessary? Is that passive modality or approach or corrective exercise approach relevant for them? And we can decide from there. I think we want to minimize it. I think that's clear. But I think it just comes down to if they are so overprotected that and they need to be validated with passive therapies, or to create a safe environment, or to help them feel like you're trustworthy and that you can make changes in their life, then yeah, sure. You have to have that tool, but as soon as we can introduce the variability first, I think variability is introduced a little less, a little less of variability in the beginning is good. And then as we can see they can handle more and more stresses, we can start to add those stresses, but we want to do that as soon as possible, especially because we know that the dependence that it creates, which is another form of limiting variability. So yeah, I think it's an important question. I think the role of using passive therapies as a way for recovery, I think, is the best way I think about it now that you've taught us.
So when you explain it that way, it makes sense to me how we can describe it to our patients. How do we explain that to the clinicians? Because our audience in the webinars are other healthcare professionals, and we don't want to just be preaching to the choir. So Aaron, can you please make sure that Mara's point is brought up again in the next webinar? Because it's very unusual that Mara is in the room, because most people in the room are probably people that agree with us. This is the most important question, because she actually is disagreeing with us.
Mm-hmm.
Got it.
And I'm wishing that we had this question. It wasn't. I wasn't aware of this question because I can't see the question. So I'm counting on everybody else to tell me when there's a good question. Did Geronimo come back?
I don't think we have him here.
Yeah, Matt, you're training a lot of clinicians, so this is like the number one thing. It was the third point in our opener.
Yeah.
The clinicians think that people need the dry needling, and that they'll use that as a catalyst. Oh, we'll calm things down and then we'll build them up. But you said it perfectly. The danger is then they attribute to you.
Yeah, and also the magic happens when they're not in the clinic. You know, I think that's the key message when I talk to staff and to patients is it's not what we do in the clinic that matters. It's what happens when you leave the clinic. That's where things really start to happen. That's where all of the stuff that we've talked about, you putting this into action, that's where it matters. Stuff that happens in the clinic here at best is going to help you for a short period of time. It's when you leave here, and sustainability of that is going to be the gold. And so from a clinician perspective, you can educate clinicians with the mechanisms of, so why do we think that these modulatory techniques, descending noxious inhibitory control mechanisms and things like that, which they might get in one sense. So there's a kind of tension, isn't there, that this kind of what the patient wants. So if you look at the expectation literature, they talk about a lot of the expectation literature from patients is to reduce pain. So there's the tension that exists with what the patient wants, and everyone wants something quickly. But there is a but. And I think it's that needs to be explored. And I think clinicians need to feel comfortable with having that difficult conversation with people. So absolutely, it's about understanding the story, understanding the patient's context, as well as the clinician's context, but actually think about what the consequences of doing that, that approach in the medium to long term.
I love it. Paula, thank you.
Thank you, guys. That was awesome.
We went over.
Yeah, I guess. I actually thought when we at the end that we had disconnected from people, and then people were still there.
There was still 75 people.
Yeah, I thought we were as well. I was like, are we still?
But people will have it on tape. It's the best part is having you guys go back and forth. So thank you.
No, thank you all. That was fantastic.
Yeah.
Love you.
Yeah, you guys are great.
Nice meeting you.
See you guys. Let's keep in touch and push this forward more. Exchange ideas.
I love it. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.